Welcome back to the Growth Hacking Culture podcast. Today, we are diving into a topic that is close to my heart. It's about how to build a workplace where things just flow. You know, that feeling where everybody feels engaged, productive, and actually enjoys coming to work. Well, I hope, in fact, that you guys know what it is, because otherwise you have a problem. But let's be real. Most workplaces are filled with friction. Think endless meetings, unclear expectations, that one colleague who always replied to all. It is kind of exhausting. And there is some research to back it up. There is a study from Gallup that found that only 36% of employees, and if I remember correctly, it's American employees, because I don't know why they don't do the well, are actually engaged at work. Yes, you know what I mean. That means a whooping majority are just going through the motions, and that costs businesses big time. We are talking about lost productivity, higher turnover, and a whole lot of untapped potential. So we are paying for employees who are just there in presence. Today, I want to discuss about this topic with Magi. And the reason why I found it quite interesting is because recently she has made a book about culture, and it's called Ignite Culture, Empowering and Leading a Healthy, High-Performance Organization from the Inside Out. And that's the book indeed. Magi Graziano is a leadership coach, organizational culture expert, and best-selling author who empowers leaders and teams to achieve extraordinary results. She has a personal journey, but I'm going to ask her about her personal journey because I really love that thing on her personal journey because it's quite close to some family personal stuff. And I felt really attracted to this personal journey, how she ended up leading a business. Magi, it is so wonderful to have you with me today.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Magi, I was mentioning the fact that you had a journey. So back then when you were 19, and
that journey.
Yes, I want people to understand how our personal experiences shape what we become, in fact, because that happens to you as well as to me. Magi, tell me a little bit more about your personal story.
Okay, so the 19-year-old girl who got pregnant, and the mother said, "You have to get married," even when I knew I shouldn't, because I knew him well enough to have sex with him. But when I got to know him well enough is this guy a high caliber individual for the rest of my life? The answer was no. But I did what my mother said, which I'll share, because who we are at 19 is not because of who we are at 19. It's because of who we were at 8.
Yep.
So I'll go back. But there I am walking down the aisle, not wanting to go, but walking down the aisle thinking, "Hello, darkness, my old friend." That marriage lasted 1 year. The guy had 22 jobs. He was not working. He was taking cash advances on the credit card and saying they were his paychecks. So it was just, the whole thing was just like weird lies and dysfunction. And we were talking before the podcast about my recent trip to Sicily. I went with my brother. Well, my brother and his wife were the two people who came to get me out of that situation, like broke me out in the middle of the night. And when I went to work, I was needing to make money because the guy wasn't able to pay child support. And so I tried a job in a hotel, $5 an hour. That wasn't going to work. Then I went to Allstate, $5.45 an hour. This is 1983. Filling O's in. This is when there were accidental death and dismemberment things that people would fill out, and I was the O filler. Not a great job. So I was at a party, and a woman was talking about recruiting, and she was somebody that I knew in school who wasn't a super high achiever, and she was talking about how much money she was making. And I said, "Well, I want you to get me a job." I went in. She went through the phone book. She called a moving company, got me an interview, and I was working at George W. Knopf's Moving and Storage as a logistics coordinator. So taking people from Roanoke, Virginia to Santa Cruz, California, but I never really knew geography. So I was like, oh my God, I can't do it. And they said, after 30 days, we're going to have to get by without you. And I called the girl up and I said, how much money did you make? If I would have kept that job, how much money would you have made? And she said $635. That was half a month's pay for me back then. I said, I need that job. And I went in, and the woman who interviewed me said, you jumped into college, you jumped out of college. You jumped into marriage, you jumped out of marriage. Why should we hire you? And I hadn't seen Officer and a Gentleman at the time, but I said, I have no other options. I must make money to support my kid, and I don't want anybody limiting what I can make. And I got into hiring, and for 25 years, I was in the top 2 or 3 of every place I ever worked, and then in the top 2 or 3 in Chicago, and then in the top 10% in the country. I got accepted into this Pinnacle Society, which was top producers. But here's the deal. I didn't know that I was really great at that job. But what I had become because of being a single mother, and then the history of time before that, is a money-making machine. I was very good with people. I was really curious, but I had gotten into this mechanism of unconscious. I was so good at the job, I was unconsciously competent at it, which means I could do it in my sleep, but I had to make 10 placements a month. I had to make 10 placements a month because I was supporting, not only did I have my son, I got remarried, and I was now somehow supporting the whole family, 5 people. And so in the learning of placing over 10,000 people, I learned why people leave, why they stay, and why they join. And it seemed, this was towards the last 10 years, I got really clear. Can we close that door, please? I got really clear that companies that were B, C environments were wanting to hire people who were top tier A players, and then they wondered why they didn't work out. And I started coaching them and saying, if you really want this person to stay or come, you have to fix the dysfunction in your management team. You have to give people more empowerment, more agency, more autonomy to really be who you want them to be. So that was my bridge into culture. And I don't know if that was the history you were talking about that you wanted, or if the 8-year-old person is what you wanted, or
No.
the 40-year-old person who lost her software company was the one you wanted.
No, that's exactly the story that I wanted, and the reason why is because I could catch some dimensions that are quite relatable to why people stays or leaves a company. You were talking about the possibility of counting on somebody. Back then, it could have been your first husband. Counting is not even about the money. It's the fact that we humans, we feel like we need to be protected, that we need to be able to count on the other person towards the same route. And the second point that I spotted is about the purpose, the sense of purpose. Why do you want to make money? Because you had a magnificent purpose. It's your family, it's your children that depended on you. And these 2 reasons count a hell of a lot in terms of why people stays in a company. If you have everything, if the financial aspect becomes less important as long as you feel protected in the workplace. If you are working hard, the hours doesn't count as much as when you feel like you are doing it for a big purpose. It's because this company wants to change the world, because they are making the world a better place, or whatever it is the purpose. If you feel compelled with that purpose, you stay, right?
Yeah, well, yes, and I think there's the intrinsic purpose, like I had to support my family. Now that I don't have a family to support, I've actually created a much bigger calling, which is to liberate the human spirit at work, for people to find freedom inside of themselves at work. But then there's the overarching noble cause of the organization. What do they stand for? Any of the companies I support, I work for, I serve, need to have a cause, a noble cause that I'm interested in, or I'm not that excited to go support them in having a better culture. For example, we worked for 5 years with an organization in Oakland, California. And when I met them, they said, we make shit pipe. And I was like, what? And they said, we do plumbing. We make the pipe that goes under the ground. When we were done with them, they created clean communities. See the difference?
Exactly.
And it actually shifted, not just the words. There's a lot of work to do after you create the words. But then they started saying, if we create clean communities, our community needs to be clean ontologically. We need to be clean with each other. We need to raise our level of integrity with how we communicate and how responsible we are for our role. And before I started working with them, it was us versus them. They create shit pipe, and they were also creating a lot of it was fun for me because I got to use a lot of analogies about caca in the space, removing the shit from the space. But they had a lot of, you guys are wrong. No, you guys are wrong. It was very us versus them. And it was a hardcore manufacturing. It was a foundry. And we went through a deep dive personal transformation and team transformation 20 at a time with every person in that company, the office, the foundry, the piping, all of it. And as people got more in touch with their own purpose and their own alignment with their mind, their body, and their heart, they became nicer, more tolerant, more patient, more conscious and aware of how they were talking to each other and how they were treating each other and what they would give their commitment to. The whole company shifted over, I would say, the first 3 years. And now the guy who hired me is now retired. He says, Magi, we had 8 of the most profitable years in the business because I invested in cultivating the human system. And before him and now after him, it is not a priority. There's lots of people who've left saying this culture is toxic because they say they care about people, but what they really care about is money. And you can have a lot of money, as my client proved, 8 of the best, most profitable years out of a 125-year company history, because they invested in how people look at themselves and look at the other and treat each other. You would think, woo, this is the biggest magic pill. But there's no magic pill, as you know. It takes cultivation of yourself and your team in order to shift the whole culture.
I love this story. Unfortunately, when I have been discussing with many people, most of the companies, once that they understand that, yes, they need a purpose, they stop there. They think that the purpose is a poster that you put in the office. And then they don't work in the system to maintain it. The habits that needs to be created, the rituals, the internal communication, all these little pieces of things that make that we are living in a day-to-day basis. The culture of the purpose of the company is represented in how we think, we act inside of the
Yes. So I was in a course with a gentleman named Jeff Wilmore, and he said, it's the environment. And I've said it in similar ways, but I loved how I call it culture. He calls it the environment, the air we're breathing, the water we're drinking, how people, just the energy. That's the other thing in my talk, Ignite Culture. I talk about its energy. Culture is energy. It's the energy that we're bringing. The how we communicate, how we have meetings, how we hire, which is another story, how we hire, how we fire, how we promote, how we do business planning. That's all our architecture. That's what HR would call our processes, but it's not processes, it's framework. The framework supports the environment, and the environment and the framework supports the ultimate noble cause. So what I think people think about is they think, oh, we have our mission, and oh, we have our values. They don't coach people and train them on how to be those values. They don't find out what's in the way of, what's in your way of being respectful here? Well, we have no accountability. So if you're not going to do it, I got to do it. And the only way I know how to do it is through force. Like, that's what a deep alignment retreat is about, is people start to look at their persona, their egoic self, and what they bring to work to defend their fiefdom, their money, their power. And what it is just kids fighting in the playground at most companies. It's 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade coming to life on the executive team. And it doesn't seem possible, but you see all these books now that most people leading companies are acting out their childhood traumas on each other.
It is. I saw it live.
Yeah, you did. You left burnt out. Everybody running in front of the truck.
Quite impressive that when you are describing culture, you are describing it more not like a consultant or a coach for culture, but more like an architect, sorry. So where you have the knowledge of the materials that it takes, the outlook or the environment that you want to form, you have knowledge of the structures that needs to be in place. So I love that. I'm going to steal it.
And anthropologist. And it's like anthropology, alchemy, and architecture, because you can build it, but if you don't nurture it, if you don't understand the invisible threads, that the social constructs and the context that people bring, and if we're not healing each person in the system can't be healed.
Yeah.
And there's so much toxicity right now, and there's so much denial about the toxicity. It's even inside companies I work with, like they'll say, we have a great culture out of one side of their mouth, and on the other side of the mouth, everyone's telling their coaches how pissed off they are at everybody else that works there. You guys, you got to get real. And if you don't have that commitment from the top to get real and reveal what's going on in the space, in the energy, in the environment, then we're just going to work ourselves to death and try to get ahead, but we're still going to lose market share. Our margin's going to erode, and our really good people, if they stay, they're not going to be as good as they could have been, or they will leave. And so it's like the people atrophy when good energy meets bad. The good energy can only stay good in an environment. I mean, that's physics. In an environment of purity, you start putting toxic energy, and the good person's either going to become part of that toxinated energy, or they're going to say, I got to get out of here. Anyway, you got me, Anna.
Magi, in fact, The problem sometimes lies on the fact that the definition of toxic environment or toxic culture is not clear, because some CEOs
Yeah.
would say, yes, in this company, there is no sexual harassment, so we are good. But there is nothing worse than an employee going to a workplace and feeling the indifference that nobody cares if I'm existing or not. And indifference is a sign of toxicity, and it's
Yes.
not in
Yeah.
any definition.
Yeah. So let's break this down a little bit. So there's toxicity, which is the worst it can be.
Hmm?
There's transaction, there's entanglement, like
Doesn't fit.
like a kind of enmeshment, entanglement. This is the way we do it, and we don't like
Yeah.
you, and you guys are this way. And then there's transactional. Give me a check and I'll take your money. Give me a check and I'll do the bare minimum. I think most companies, if they were present, would admit if those numbers by Gallup are right, and I think Gallup only does the US, but I know people in Brazil and Europe and Mexico, and there's culture work going on everywhere, because there's the human being is evolving to the point where the human being wants more than post-World War II autocratic, this is how you work. You know what I mean? So I think if they were telling the truth, most companies would have to say they have a transactional culture, because if 70% of the people are not engaged. But here's what is harder for them to admit. They think it's Evan and Magi who are not getting along, and it's just them.
Yeah.
But what happens is you take all your disdain for me and you share it, whether you know you're sharing it or not, by ignoring an email, by saying, don't listen to that person. So you share it with your children at work. And then I share my disdain for you with my children at work. And now my children, it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I don't know if you know that analogy, but from the US, like two families feuding, like we don't like each other. And so that's entanglement, but toxicity is not just not being seen, not being heard, being steamrolled, blowing people off for meetings. Like being late is one thing. We all run late, but you schedule a meeting, you have 6 other people attending that meeting, and you no-show with no phone call, no acknowledgement, and no apology, and everyone just expects that that's your behavior. That's freaking toxic. It's also toxic if somebody pisses you off at work, that they're invisible to you. Like there's one guy who's a key guy in the succession plan. They love him, and he's in operations and he works with salespeople. Well, he's got to tell salespeople that what they can't do. And he says that when he sees them in his own place of work, they walk right by him like he's invisible. And he said to his boss a couple months ago, I don't know how much longer I can take this. That's toxicity. Toxicity is when you're at a trade show and you're the only woman and the men are talking about getting laid in Vegas from prostitutes.
Yeah.
That's toxic. I mean, I can give you 100 other. It's toxic that you're on an executive team and you cannot get through a meeting without arguing and fighting and yelling and blaming and shaming. Shaming, blaming is toxic. Yelling and screaming is toxic. If you're getting a lot of lawsuits, hello world, toxic. You might say, I'm a victim. All these people are giving me lawsuits because they're confused. No, if it's a point where somebody's going to take a case, there's something you're doing that's not working. Last thing, because I'm on a rant. If super nice and sweet and cheery and everything is pixie dust and roses and no one's held accountable, that's toxic, because there is always going to be people carrying the load for other people and they will have resentment. And I mean, it's like, it's not that hard to think about a healthy human system. We talk straight to each other. We apologize for being jerks, because we're all human and we're all jerks. We do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it. And if we don't, we communicate about that. Like we're responsible citizens. We deliver more than what we're asked for. Because as I deliver more, I learn more, I grow. And when I leave this job that maybe I think average about, what I'm going to take with me is me and my behavior and all of the habits that I developed at this company. And when we say, well, I'm going to be shitty because they're shitty, I'm just going to be shitty, I'm not going to be responsible. Then we go to the next company and guess what we take with us? Yes, our habits.
Yeah.
And then we think somebody's picking on us. But we're, self-awareness is, we do assessments too. I want to try yours out. I want you to try mine out. The lowest score globally on our assessment is self-awareness, self-control, and accountability for others. 3 lowest scores globally. This tells you why there's toxicity in companies. I'm not aware, and I'm not aware that I'm not aware. And then when I'm triggered, I lash out and act out and CC everybody, or blame or shame, but I'm not even aware I'm doing that because I'm clueless. Or when I don't do my job and I don't keep my word, I'm clueless that I'm not aware of my own awareness, and I laugh it off because I'm embarrassed. And then nobody believes in themselves enough and is aware enough to hold people accountable. So what you have is, since shit is the word of the day, a shit show.
Magi, what is crazy, and I'm still not touching the questions that I had prepared for you. But anyways, this is so interesting. What is crazy is that I found once the number of companies who have a self-awareness training or coaching program, and it's around 6%. 6% of companies are
Ridiculous.
doing a self-awareness when it is a milestone, an important, a critical step in order to drive a culture where you want to go.
So the thing is, it's powerful what you're saying, because there are companies who do coaching, but they do coaching like, we have this app, and you're going to go on the app and you're going to pick a coach, and there's no designed alliance, and there's no real plan, and nobody's getting the same coaching. There's no distinctions to share, and it's not in service of a bigger picture. And it's on top of no self-awareness. So what I've run into is companies that do leadership training and have coaching, but they don't understand ontology or the study of being a human being. They don't understand energy, or that context is decisive. Your background projects onto your foreground. You can have the best leadership training in the world, but if you don't understand the context you're operating through, like we got one guy who operates like he's going to go tackle someone every day, and even people he needs to be supporting him, they have to understand what their persona is that they're projecting, and that their view is clouded by their context. They don't always see reality for what reality is, most people. And so if there was any budget like that the world would give, like a global budget for the expansion of human consciousness, it would be self-awareness and blind spots that I would recommend, including for every political party on the planet and every politician.
Oh, yes, yes. Don't start me on that.
We're all dealing with some pretty crazy, and not just in the US. The more international people I talk to, I'm like, oh my God, you guys have the same situation. Like, what is happening here?
Indeed. Now, if we jump into this type of corporations who want to change because of different reasons, we don't care. In your experience, what do you see as the biggest obstacles that they face when trying to shift their work culture? What could be
that they want to go too fast. They want to go too fast. They don't understand the disciplines of plan change. They don't even know it's a thing, that there's like a framework, an architecture for changing effectively. They want to go too fast. They don't understand. They don't have enough people in the coalition, in the change. We call it culture catalyst. They don't have enough people of influence that are bought in. They don't understand that under it all, that what I said already, that people have a context, and that context could be, oh my God, if we change, I will be irrelevant. Oh my God, goodness, you've done this before and it hasn't worked. So there's all that baggage and that past, and people cannot change if they're dragging around the past. If their past is in their future, it's what I would say to the foundry company with the pipe. If you have caca in the space, there's no space to create. You have to do the work to tell the truth about what's in the way so you can remove it. And that takes a lot of courage and a lot of vulnerability. And I do think it takes support. I think you need a facilitator who knows how to facilitate these conversations, because you have to do it in a way where nobody is to blame and everyone's responsible. And that's a distinction that's not easy to get. So resistance, we could say, but resistance is just fear. A plan, what you said, an obstacle is they do the vision, they do the mission, they do the values, and then they think that those documents on the wall are enough to permeate people's brains. I think the other thing is consistently, once you do the work, you tell the truth, you remove the caca, you understand people's fears, then you have to invent a future that is so compelling that people see what's possible, they feel what's possible for the company and themselves. And then once you do that, you cannot autopilot this. You actually have to have a process where people are working together. So at my company, as our support system is coaching, momentum coaching. We have leaders creating leaders. So we have evolving the leader within. So it's continual on a monthly basis, coming back and saying, how do we apply this to where we're at in the transformation? But I think Harvard, I'm sure everyone has access to HBR, why transformation fails. They don't have architecture. They don't understand energy or the environment. They don't understand the human condition, and they don't understand that it's a human system that they're trying to shift. So you need to shift a human system with principles of shifting the human spirit. So I mean, I think that's, okay, money might be an obstacle, but let's look at where we're spending the money now.
Exactly. Sometimes I do think that money is not the obstacle. It is just the bullshit that we put in front just because we don't want to make it happen. Because if we really wanted to start the shift, and even if we decided, yeah, these consultants are super expensive, you can start with little steps already to progress, to change. And sometimes it's just about behaviors. It's not about creating a mega event where everybody party and co-designs the future of the company. Save that money to just to have some control on micro behaviors that your company can have to change the rest.
Yes.
Start with the guys on the top, because we look at them and we think that if he's behaving like that, I should behave like that, because then I can progress onto that level.
Yeah. So obstacles, time, perception. It's another BS. It's a BS excuse. We don't have time, because you don't have time not to. Money, BS, because if 70% of your employees are not engaged, you are and if they're in frustration or fear, you're losing 80% of what you're paying them to spend time complaining, spinning out, frozen because they can't get things done. I mean, the truth is, when people are operating below the power and freedom line, they are no more than 30% effective during the day. And they will tell you that if you ask.
Yeah.
And the third biggest obstacle beyond everything else I said is the willingness to change the self. So in this book, the whole first third of this book is about the executive, the leader of whatever you want to call it, the chief commanding officer of whatever enterprise, looking in the mirror to see where are they part of the solution and where are they part of the problem. Because people do mime. So I was just talking, we have a culture catalyst certification program that certifies people to do the work that I do, because there's only 10 of us, and I'm not interested in building a global enterprise. I'm much more interested in building a network of contribution where I work with people all over the world, and we come together and bring our talents in this phraseology, right, in this architecture, to transform culture. But I have a woman in the Culture Catalyst program, and she says that her boss, the CEO of that company, is a self-proclaimed workaholic. And she'll say, you guys don't have to work as hard as me. You guys don't have to work. But she sends emails out at 3:00 in the morning. She sends emails out on the weekend. And people feel like, well, if I don't respond, she'll think I'm not responsive, or she'll think I'm not responsible. And so people don't do what you say, they do what you do. So now she's 2 years away from retirement. She's much more aware now than she was when she was in it, climbing, clawing, sending emails. Now she's starting to see, wow, if I really am going to leave in 2 years, I have to step back and empower other people. And I'm not going to work weekends anymore because life is short. But until she was ready, and I've been working with her, she's improved in a lot of ways. She's exponentially improving over the last 3 years, because she sees the light at the end of the tunnel, and she sees that what she's built will not be sustainable without her. So she has to actually back up the truck and make space for other people in their own way of leadership to rise. She's my number one fan in the book. I mean, she's like, you need to teach everybody in my company to do this and create culture catalysts, because she sees that while she's created miracles, they'll all disappear, they'll backtrack, they'll retract when she's gone, if she doesn't elevate other people. And not in her way, not in her framework of, I got to work 24/7, but in theirs.
We have mentioned, and you have mentioned, in fact, several times, that leaders need to do the work of identifying the root causes for problems, for challenges that you have in culture. And one thing that we will agree is that this is not a subjective job. It's not about I feel like. It is possible to be very scientific in terms of having data to prove, and not the data from your first level of leaders below you, but data that goes across the company, because the first leaders are scared of the CEO, and they will bullshit all the way through. Now, what would you want?
They're scared of being exposed, I would say, more so than scared of, because there's some CEOs you wouldn't be scared of. They're afraid if everyone saw their warts and their imperfections, that people would judge them. It's middle school. It is middle school on the executive team.
So, Magi, what type of tools? I mean, I'm pretty sure that your journey in this work has been trying some tools, saying, "Oh, this is shit, go away." What type of tools would you advise leaders to use in order to have some measurements on culture? Tell me the bad and the good ones.
Yeah, so I will only refer the good one. And I have two things that I use all the time now. I use something called the Intermetrics, and that is a psychometrics assessment that is a global tool. and it assesses 79 competencies. However, it also assesses my self-belief, my self-esteem, my self-direction, and then it also assesses how I look at my perspective, my perception, how I see the world outside me, which is powerful when you're looking at shifting a culture. And if you got a coach, you want to know what the filter in the glasses looks like so we can start to move that filter out of the way. It also looks at values and behaviors. And so I love that tool. I've been using that tool in many reiterations because they're innovative for 25 years. And they're always improving it. The other that I use is called Ideal Actual Culture Circumplex. And you give it to, it's out of Mount Prospect, Illinois, where I grew up. But I didn't hear about it through them. I was at a conference, met a woman that I knew through my work in transformation, personal transformation. We were both seminar leaders. And she said, oh, I'm doing this really cool thing. And so I went to the conference and Marshall Goldsmith was speaking. And his talk was What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which I was already using that book in the work that I was doing. But they talk about, so you give, let's say 10% of the population or 20%, or if you really want to give it to the whole population, it could get really costly. But if you have a nice pollination of different levels of the organization, different durations, 10 to 20% will give you a good sampling. And then it will also tell you exactly where the pockets of toxicity or entanglement or transaction exists. But it will ask everybody what they want in a culture. And you know what people say they want? They want high achievement. People want to work for a winning team. They want humanistic, like you treat me like a human being. I feel seen, heard, respected, appreciated. They want affiliative. They want to cross-pollinate with other people in other departments. They want to learn from each other. They want it to be open, like open source. And they want self-actualization. They want to be able to be their highest and best in their company. To you and I, we're like, oh yeah, we get that. But most clients don't get that that's what people want. And then the second survey, this is the money. The second survey is what kind of culture do we have? And 90% of the time, what they say they want is incongruent with what they have. And what they report that they have is some version of destructive. It's either extremely competitive on the inside, like internal competition, oppositional, perfectionistic, and powering up over others. If you don't do what I want, I'll do it without you. Or this team against that team. And some well-meaning people in the 80s and 90s said competition is good. But just like Microsoft, when the competition for the external, the real competitors is digested as energy, we're now competing against ourselves and we're no longer sharing, affiliating, we're blaming, we're shaming. So that's the aggressive defensive. But there's not just the aggressive people who are the problem. And this is where I fight the fight in social media. Because all you people that are throwing stones, are you passive? Are you actually getting the work done that you said you would get done? So the other half of a destructive culture is passivity, conformism, only doing what you're asked to do. So complacency, status quo, hiding out, avoiding conflict. So this passive defensive is just as bad as the aggressive defensive. And these guys are the ones everybody blames. Oh, you're too aggressive. You say all the wrong things. Well, why these people are getting more and more aggressive is because these people are a little too passive and they're not getting enough done. Kind of sounds like the American political scene. It's blaming each other, shaming each other, and it's caustic, and it's like being in a dysfunctional family. because every time you put human beings together, whenever one or more gathers, it is a human system. And we got to say, do we want to be in a destructive, interpersonal, or do we want to be constructive? So not only does the survey give you two circumplexes, ideal and actual, then it'll tell you all the areas of where the dysfunction exists. So I'll give you a couple examples. We talk about having a vision, but we don't live it. We talk about values, but we don't live it. We talk about customers, but we don't really pay attention to them. It's how many of you are part of that survey. It tells you how many people are actively looking for other jobs. Doesn't tell you who, tells you how many. And you can pinpoint it per geography, per tenure, per location. And then if you're smart, you never ask who said what, so I can go do something about it. But people pay for the survey, 20 grand to survey 10% of the people. So it's an expensive, because you're not just delivering the results, you have to actually, what's our plan? What are we going to do about it? You have to interpret the results and look at what are the 2 or 3 areas we can go to work fastest. So you never want to, it doesn't matter who said what. If one person calls you a horse, you can say, you're a jerk. Don't call me a horse. If 2 people call you a horse, you want to look in the mirror and see if you're growing ears. If 3 people call you a horse, you want to see if you're growing a tail. And if 4 people or 10% of your population or 20% or 30% say you're a horse, you need to buy a saddle and get some training on how to operate. So that's my favorite assessment.
A very
because
American
it tells us where to go to work. It tells us where to go to work.
Indeed. So let's imagine you have spent your 20 grants in the into having an assessment, having some initial findings that tells you directionally where to go, what type of actions you should start putting together. And suddenly the client will tell you, yeah, okay, thank you. I know what to do now. So what is the thing that a good advisor or culture architect, now that we have found this beautiful name, should be doing in order that if he's responsible to help a company to implement, is it more about taking more time working with the leaders and then scaling down? Is it preparing tools like training? Does it really work? Training, by the way, to teach if you need to build new behaviors, does it really work? Or what is the things
These are big
that you
questions.
would use?
So if somebody just wants us to do the survey and they don't want us to help them, I'm not the best person to teach people or to advocate that you push yourself on them. Because if there's not a willingness to change, I don't want their money. I don't want to spend my time with them. It's like a person who doesn't really want coaching. So before I ever do the survey, I've got a sense that this person really does want to spend the time, spend the money, and has a willingness to change. I often will have people read the book and say, before we do anything, read the book, make sure we're aligned. What I think is training doesn't work when it's vanilla icing on top of a poo-poo pie. If we have bad behaviors and we don't know who we are and we're in defense mode or we're irresponsible, all the training in the world won't change our behavior. So I believe, this is you're asking me, I believe that an ontological deep dive, like an inquiry, a deep curiosity about we got the survey results. What about us, our executive team, is perpetuating these results? And it's like, that's why I say anthropology, excavation, alchemy. I mean, you're really digging about what are we doing that is causing, this behavior. So I'll give you an example. A client that is in a really noble cause to protect world travelers, 4 founders started this company, and it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew, and they were capped out around 25, 30 million. And so they were growing, but not as much as they wanted to. That's not a global enterprise. And what they were doing quite often was arguing with the 4 of them in their executive sessions, screaming, yelling, pounding. People that said that they would do work were not doing work, and they weren't holding them accountable. They even hired somebody from EOS, from the book Traction, which is on my bookshelf. So they were doing EOS for years. They had this person, but they still, nobody was accountable. So they were in this familia human system behavior of, we've got the bully, we've got the guy that's like, I can't get anything done. You've got the victim, you've got the hero, and they were going nowhere. And their VP of HR said to them, you have a 25% turnover here. This is a tech company. It's hard to hire people. At some point, we have to look at where the dysfunction is stemming from. We need to go to California and work with Magi. And she got the guy on a weekday, and he said yes. They didn't know why they were coming, but we went for a 3-day deep dive in the woods, and we just started talking about what emerged was the way it used to be when they were working in the garage. And they didn't have employees, and they didn't have overhead, and they just had a vision. And then each of them moved into roles of their highest level of incompetence. And so what began happening is they were defending their weaknesses rather than saying, I'm not good at this. I need to have someone else do it. They weren't empowering the next generation of 16 leaders. So throughout this 3-day deep dive, they got so reconnected with each other. And the 3rd day, we put them on a ropes course. Now, in the context of the work we did the first 2 days, it got to come alive in supporting each other, making through that ropes course. They were so connected. They were so in love with each other and the business that they're in. By the time they left, they already booked the session for the 16 next level leaders. And then we did 3 days with them. Within 6 months of those 2 3-day deep dives and coaching, they got their act together. People started being more accountable. They were more careful with what they would say yes to. And they had a process or architecture around how to have meetings and how to, not have our emotions running the show. And they had coaching. Within 6 months, they skyrocketed. They launched their new product. They got funded from a global provider, and they shifted their culture. And then there was more work to keep doing to keep it evolving. It's not a we get it and we stop. It's a continual evolution. So back to your talk about, how much are people spending on self-awareness and coaching and development. Once you have your vision and you've made it over the hump and you've gotten into breakthrough, don't get cocky. Don't overestimate that you got it handled. Because as soon as we get cocky, yesterday's transformation is tomorrow's ego trip, is what people say in the biz. And you really need to be, you don't need to be on a lifeline, but a quarterly check-in, a quarterly intervention, a quarterly recalibration. And you said it, parties and big events. Even in my book, I talk about that. You've got to start with the self, then each self on the executive team, then the executive team, then the next level, all of the selves, and then the executive team. And then you have to have pockets of people, culture coalition, culture catalyst, that are also working on the self and then working as a team. And now you have all these highly functioning teams. That's how you have an extraordinary culture, because the highly functioning teams are interacting with each other in a state of flow and not a state of friction. And that's how you do it.
I love that, because you just mentioned the title of this episode, How to Shift Work Culture from Friction to Flow. And by the way, so now we are arriving close to the end. One takeaway is that definitely to continue this conversation, one thing that people interested about shifting their culture is to read the book Ignite Culture, available in Amazon. Just checked it. It is still available.
And it's got a new workbook that tells you how to apply everything that you're learning. Brand
That's
new, just
amazing.
launched.
Magi, how do people reach you out if they want to have a chit chat about what magic can do? How can they reach you out?
Well, margaretgraziano.com is my personal website. It's for public speaking, for talks, and then Keen Alignment is the company that I'm the founder of, and that talks about all of our programs and what we do. So either way, or link into me or find me on YouTube.
I will definitely put the 3 links below the description of this episode. Magi, it was really nice to speak to you. Really, in a very understandable way, you have put together the science that there is, the psychology, the human psychology that it has a big impact on the change that an organization can have. And unfortunately, sometimes we disregard this human side and we think that we bring novelty, we do a change, a transformation because of business imperative, but without the buy-in of humans and the understanding of how we process change. In fact, it would be so easy because sometimes we just have to think about ourselves when we want to change, lose weight, do something new, be nice with our wives or partners or whatsoever, how difficult it is. I mean, if we extrapolate to organizations, it is difficult.
Yeah, times 10. So I forgot to tell you, on the top of my website, Keen Alignment, or both websites, people can take a free culture assessment and it will evaluate how competent your organization is in intent, in environment, and in architecture. And it will give you things to do about where your weaknesses are. So that's a freebie. Go forth and use it.
I will put that link too. I just took the note. Magi, thank you very much for spending some time with me. Thank you. Have an excellent day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.